At 2:47 a.m., my heart stopped following its own rhythm because someone turned it off. And the person who did it was sleeping in the next room. How does your own sister decide you're better off dead? Because she thinks you're seeking sympathy. My name is Megan Davis. I'm 38 years old, a software engineer, and until recently, I believed the worst thing my family had ever done to me was ignore me. I was wrong. What happened that night didn't begin at 2:47 a.m. It began years before that with favoritism, with silence, with the slow erosion of being invisible in your own home. But to understand how I nearly died, I need to take you back to the moment I realized I woke up gasping. Not the kind of gasp you recover from with a glass of water. This was violent, instinctive. My chest burned like acid had been poured inside my ribs. My heart wasn't beating normally, it was stuttering, misfiring, struggling to remember what it was supposed to do. The steady, mechanical reassurance I'd grown used to over the past 6 months, the faint but reliable rhythm from my pacemaker was gone. I pressed my palm against the scar beneath my collarbone. Something was wrong. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m. in harsh red numbers. The room felt underwater, like I was looking at everything through a distorted lens. I tried to inhale, but the air didn't seem to reach all the way down. My pulse was chaotic, too slow, then too fast, then nothing that felt right. I remember thinking, very clearly, this is how it ends. I reached for my phone. My fingers barely cooperated. I don't remember exactly what I said when I called 911. I remember lying on the floor because sitting upright became impossible. I remember the strange thought that it was unfair to die in the same house where I had spent 18 years learning to shrink myself. I wasn't supposed to be there that night. I had moved out years ago, but Grandpa Harold had died a week earlier, and the family gathered at his house before the will reading. That house still smelled like old books and cedarwood. It still held memories of the only person in my family who had ever truly seen me. The paramedics arrived quickly, minutes, though it felt like hours. They lifted me onto a stretcher, oxygen mask, bright lights, questions I could barely answer. In the hallway, my parents stood in their pajamas, confused. My uncle rubbed his eyes, and my sister, Lindsay, stood slightly behind our mother, her expression carefully arranged into concern. She looked prepared. At the hospital, doctors stabilized me fast. Medication corrected the rhythm enough to keep me conscious. Machines beeped around me in mechanical sympathy. Eventually, a cardiologist pulled the curtain closed and lowered her voice. "Megan," she said carefully, "this wasn't a device malfunction." I stared at her. "Your pacemaker was accessed remotely. The pacing function was manually disabled." For a moment, I didn't understand the sentence. It hovered between us like foreign language. "That's not possible," I said. "I didn't touch it." "I know," she replied quietly. "The access log shows the command came from your phone." Before I could process that, the curtain flew open. Lindsay rushed in, already crying. "Oh my God, Megan, I'm so sorry," she sobbed, collapsing into the chair beside my bed. "I heard the ambulance and ran to your room. I grabbed your phone to check your heart rate, and I must have pressed something wrong. The app was confusing. I didn't know what I was doing." My mother wrapped her arms around Lindsay immediately. "It was an accident," Mom insisted. "She was just trying to help." My father nodded. My uncle patted Lindsay's shoulder. Someone handed her water. No one looked at me. No one asked if I was okay. I lay there connected to monitors, listening to the narrative form around me like wet cement hardening. Lindsay cried harder. She buried her face into our mother's shoulder. My mother stroked her hair as if she were the one who had nearly died. Part of me wanted to believe her, because the alternative that my sister had intentionally disabled the device keeping me alive was too monstrous to accept. But something about her performance felt rehearsed. I had seen Lindsay cry her way out of consequences my entire life. When she broke things and blamed me, when she dated someone I was seeing, when she lied and twisted the truth until everyone doubted their own memory. Tears were her currency, and they had always worked. The cardiologist watched the scene with a tight expression, but said nothing more. There wasn't enough proof to challenge the accident explanation, at least not yet. By the time I was discharged the next day, the family story was fully formed. Lindsay made a mistake. Megan was overreacting. Megan had always been jealous. I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength. But as I left the hospital, a quiet unease settled into me, because something didn't add up. Lindsay had asked very specific questions about my pacemaker when I got it 6 months ago. She had wanted to know how it worked, how it connected to my phone, whether settings could be adjusted remotely. At the time, I thought she was being self-centered, making my medical condition about herself. Now I wasn't so sure. That night, back in my apartment, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the cardiologist's voice, manually disabled. My pacemaker didn't just fail. Someone turned it off, and whether it was an accident or not, I knew one thing with unsettling clarity. If I had slept 20 more minutes, I wouldn't be here telling this story. But what I didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that something else had been recording that night, and that recording was about to change everything. If you've ever been the strong one in your family, you know what that really means. It means you don't get protected. It means when something goes wrong, people assume you'll handle it quietly. I grew up being told I was independent, responsible, mature. Words that sound flattering until you realize they're often code for, you don't need us as much as she does. She's more sensitive. She struggles more. You're stronger, Megan. My mother repeated that phrase so often it became scripture in our house. You're stronger. Lindsay needs us more. I heard it in 8th grade when Lindsay took credit for my science project and won a school award. My parents said I should be proud of her confidence. I heard it when she borrowed my first car and totaled it. I was told accidents happen. I heard it when she started dating a man I'd been seeing for 3 months. Be happy for her, my mother said gently. She deserves love too. It didn't matter that I had been there first. It didn't matter that it hurt. Lindsay was fragile. I was resilient. Resilient children become adults who don't ask for help. By the time I was 23, I paid my own way through college while my parents saved money for Lindsay's dream wedding. The wedding never happened. The money was never redirected. I built a career in tech, 15 years. Late nights, promotions, 6-figure salary. My family described it vaguely as, Megan does computer stuff. I never corrected them, because success made Lindsay uncomfortable, and making Lindsay uncomfortable was treated like a crime. So, when I was diagnosed with a heart arrhythmia 6 months ago, I didn't dramatize it. I didn't ask for sympathy. I scheduled the surgery, informed my family, and prepared to move on. My mother's first question wasn't about my health. Can you schedule it around Lindsay's birthday trip? Lindsay's reaction was stranger. She wasn't emotional. She was curious. How exactly does it work? Is it connected to Wi-Fi? Can you control it from your phone? Does it alert you if something changes? At the time, I brushed it off. That was Lindsay, always fascinated by attention-adjacent things. After surgery, my cardiologist recommended I use a sleep tracking app to monitor breathing patterns at night. The app had a feature that automatically recorded any sound above a certain volume while I slept. It was designed to detect snoring or irregular breathing. I barely thought about it. 1 month before Grandpa died, I made a small, careless mistake. I had just returned from a cardiology appointment. I was tired, slightly dizzy from medication adjustments. I asked Lindsay to help me check my pacemaker monitoring app because my vision felt unfocused. She stood beside me as I typed my password. I even joked that I used the same password across my medical apps because it was easier to remember. She nodded. Her eyes lingered on the screen. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Sisters help each other. Then, Grandpa Harold died. He had always been different. He remembered things about me, my graduation date, my first promotion, the name of a software project I led. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. A week before he passed, he said something that felt cryptic. I tested your sister, he told me quietly. She failed. You'll understand soon. At his funeral, Lindsay didn't look devastated. She looked anxious. She checked her phone constantly, whispered urgently to her boyfriend Kevin, left the room for calls. When someone mentioned the will reading scheduled for the following week, her smile flickered just slightly. That flicker stayed with me. 2 nights later, the pacemaker incident happened. At the hospital, everyone accepted her explanation immediately. But after I came home, doubt grew heavier. Then Marcus called. When he told me someone had been accessing my monitoring portal for 3 months from an unknown device, my body went cold. 3 months ago was exactly when Lindsay's curiosity began. 3 months ago was when she started asking technical questions. 3 months ago was when she started watching me more closely, studying me. Marcus explained, the access pattern wasn't random. It was consistent, almost daily at times, reviewing heart rhythms, pacing thresholds, battery life. Whoever accessed this, he said carefully, was learning how your device worked. That wasn't an accident. That was preparation. After I hung up, my apartment felt too quiet. Then I remembered the sleep app. I opened it with shaking hands and scrolled to the early morning of the incident, 2:13 a.m. I pressed play. First, the faint creak of a door, then soft footsteps across wood flooring, then her voice. Just don't wake up, Megan. Just don't wake up. Then everything will finally be mine. The words weren't loud. They weren't hysterical. They were calm, hopeful. I replayed it over and over, as if repetition might make it sound different. It didn't. In that moment, something shifted permanently inside me. This wasn't sibling rivalry. This wasn't jealousy. This was intent. And suddenly, Grandpa's strange final words made sense. I tested your sister. She failed. I just didn't realize how badly she had failed. And if I wanted the truth to survive in a family that specialized in denial, I would have to do something I had never done before. I would have to stop being the strong one and start being the one who speaks. After I heard the recording, I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I would break down, scream, call someone, do something dramatic. But instead, I felt something colder than fear settle inside my chest. Not panic, not hysteria, clarity. Because once you hear your own sister whisper, just don't wake up, there's no room left for denial. I called Marcus back the next morning. My voice sounded calm, almost detached, as if I were describing something that had happened to someone else. I have audio, I told him, from a sleep app. It recorded someone entering my room. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. We scheduled a secure video call. He walked me through the pacemaker logs carefully, explaining each entry, each timestamp, the access from an unknown device, the consistent monitoring over 3 months, the exact moment at 2:14 a.m. When the pacing function was manually disabled, the command originated from my phone, which had been sitting on my nightstand while I slept. Someone had picked it up, entered my password, turned off the device that kept my heart beating. Miss Davis, Marcus said gently, this pattern strongly suggests premeditation. The word landed heavier than anything else had. Premeditation, not a mistake, not confusion, not panic. Planning. I ended the call and sat very still, letting the full shape of what had happened take form. The recording, the logs, the timeline, 3 months of access, questions about the device, watching me type my password. This didn't start the night Grandpa died, but Grandpa's death might have been the trigger. That afternoon, I went back through memories I hadn't examined closely enough. At Grandpa Harold's funeral, Lindsay had been restless, not devastated, restless. She kept checking her phone, stepping away to whisper with Kevin. When someone mentioned the will reading, I remembered the flicker of tension in her expression. And then I remembered something else. A week before he passed, Grandpa had called me into his study. He had looked tired, but his eyes were sharp as ever. I tested your sister, he said quietly. She failed. You'll understand soon. At the time, I thought he meant something financial. Maybe she'd asked for money again. But now the sentence echoed differently. Tested. Failed. What had he known? 2 days later, my phone rang again. This time it was my Aunt Patricia. She rarely called me directly. She was the quiet one in the family, the observer, the one who sat at the edge of gatherings, watching everything but rarely stepping into conflict. Her voice trembled. "Megan, I need to talk to you, in person." We met at a small cafe near her apartment. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I should have said something years ago," she began. "I've been a coward." My stomach tightened. She told me about Grandpa giving Lindsay $50,000 2 years earlier. He told her it was to help their mother pay medical debt. Lindsay promised she would. Instead, she bought a car, designer bags, a trip to Europe. Grandpa found out. He rewrote his will shortly after. He wanted to see who she really was, Patricia whispered. He didn't like what he saw. That explained the inheritance tension, but Patricia wasn't finished. "Do you remember when your brakes failed?" she asked. Of course I remembered. I was 28, driving on the highway. The pedal went soft beneath my foot. The car spun across lanes before slamming into the median. The mechanic later said corrosion in the brake line. Wear and tear. Unfortunate. "The day before that accident," Patricia said, barely above a whisper, "I came home early and saw Lindsay in the garage. She was crouched beside your car with a flashlight. When she saw me, she jumped and said she'd dropped an earring." The cafe suddenly felt too small. "I believed her," Patricia continued. "But after what happened with your heart, I can't stop thinking about it." A chill spread through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "What if," she said slowly, "this wasn't the first time?" For a long time, I couldn't speak, because if she was right, then the story of my life had a darker thread running through it than I ever allowed myself to see. Had Lindsay always been this capable? Or had she grown into it? The pattern was impossible to ignore now. Jealousy when I succeeded, rage when I was noticed, obsession when I was vulnerable, financial desperation, inheritance at stake. The pieces align too cleanly. But here's what people don't tell you about betrayal. Even when the evidence is overwhelming, your heart resists the truth. I still had moments where I thought, maybe I'm misinterpreting this. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe she didn't understand what she was doing. Then I would replay the audio. "Just don't wake up." There was no confusion in her voice. Only hope. That night, I walked through my apartment slowly, touching objects like they could ground me. The couch, the kitchen counter, the framed photo of me and Grandpa at my college graduation, one of the few pictures where I looked truly seen. I realized something important then. If I confronted my family privately, they would close ranks around Lindsay. They always had. They would say I was overreacting. They would question the recording. They would say I was trying to damage her reputation out of jealousy over the will. They would protect her. Again. But the will reading was still scheduled. Everyone would be in one room. The estate lawyer would be present. Emotions would already be heightened. And for once, Lindsay wouldn't control the narrative. I called the estate attorney and asked, calmly, if I could present information relevant to family matters after the will was read. I didn't accuse anyone. I just said there were facts that needed to be shared. He agreed. I asked Marcus if he would be willing to join via video call to explain the pacemaker logs as a technical expert. He didn't hesitate. And I asked Aunt Patricia if she would be there. She swallowed hard. "Yes," she said. "It's time." For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking someone to defend me out of love. I was assembling evidence. Because if my sister believed I was seeking sympathy, then she was about to see what truth looks like. And this time, no one would be able to cry their way out of it. The morning of the will reading arrived quietly. Too quietly. The kind of calm that feels like the air before a storm. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at the small scar beneath my collarbone. 6 months ago, that scar represented survival. Now it represented something else. Proof. Proof that someone tried to silence me permanently. And proof that I woke up. Lindsay didn't know yet that I had the recording. She didn't know about the access logs. She didn't know Patricia had decided to speak. She walked into Grandpa's house that morning, smiling. And for the first time in 38 years, I wasn't the one who felt invisible. The morning of the will reading felt strangely ordinary. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Grandpa Harold's living room. dust floating in the air like nothing in the world had changed. The same mahogany desk sat at the front of the room, the same worn leather chairs, the same faint smell of cedar and old paper. If someone had walked in without context, they would have thought this was just another Sunday gathering. But beneath the surface, everything was different. 14 members of the Davis family filled the room in quiet clusters. My father stood near the fireplace. My uncle paced by the window. A few cousins whispered to each other. Aunt Patricia sat toward the back, hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes meeting mine for a brief second. It was enough. We both knew what was about to happen. And then Lindsay walked in. She was wearing a cream blazer and gold jewelry, her hair styled perfectly, red lipstick, confident posture. She looked like someone about to receive congratulations. She took a seat near the front, crossing her legs deliberately, her expression calm but alert. If she felt nervous, she hid it well. I sat near the side table, my laptop already open but angled so no one could see the screen. Marcus was waiting in a secure video call, camera off for now. The estate attorney, Richard Hoffman, cleared his throat and called the room to order. There was a shift in the air when he spoke. Before reading the will, he announced that Grandpa had left a recorded video message to be played first. A faint ripple of surprise moved through the room. Lindsay's smile tightened slightly, but she maintained composure. The television flickered on. Grandpa's face appeared on the screen, older and thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp, steady, intentional. "If you're watching this," he began, "I'm gone, and there are things that need to be said clearly." His voice filled the room in a way that felt heavier than silence. No one moved. 2 years ago, I gave Lindsay $50,000, he continued. I told her it was to help her mother pay off medical debt. I wanted to see what she would do with responsibility. Lindsay's fingers tightened around her handbag. She promised she would help, Grandpa said. Instead, she bought a car, designer bags, and a trip to Europe. A sharp inhale came from my mother. My father's shoulders stiffened. Grandpa didn't soften his tone. I waited for her to come to me. To tell the truth, she never did. Lindsay's eyes began to shine, but not with grief, with calculation. And 6 months before my death, Grandpa continued, $30,000 was transferred from my savings account without my authorization. The bank traced the transaction to a computer in this house. The room went completely still. I know who did it, Grandpa said quietly. And I gave her time to confess. She chose not to. Lindsay's composure cracked. That's not fair, she whispered, but no one responded. I rewrote my will the week after, Grandpa finished, because character matters more than blood. The screen went dark. For a long moment, no one spoke. My mother looked as if something inside her had splintered. My father avoided Lindsay's eyes entirely. The attorney cleared his throat gently. Before we proceed with the reading of the will, he said, Miss Megan Davis has requested permission to present additional information relevant to these proceedings. All eyes turned to me. I stood slowly. My heart was steady not because I wasn't afraid, but because I had already faced the worst version of this story alone. I won't take long, I said evenly. But what I'm about to share is directly connected to the events of last week. I turned my laptop toward the television and connected the screen. Marcus appeared first, professional, composed. This is Marcus Allen, I explained. He's a technical specialist with the manufacturer of my pacemaker. Lindsay shifted in her seat. On the night before the original will reading, I continued, someone entered my bedroom at 2:13 a.m. and used my phone to disable the pacing function on my pacemaker. Gasps rippled across the room. Lindsay's voice rose immediately. That's not what happened. I told you it was an accident. Marcus began speaking calmly, explaining the access logs. 3 months of unauthorized login activity from an unknown device. Regular monitoring of my cardiac data. The specific command at 2:14 a.m. that disabled pacing. The location data matching Grandpa's house. These records are stored on secure servers, Marcus explained. They cannot be altered by the patient. Lindsay shook her head rapidly. She's twisting this. I was trying to help her. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I clicked play. The room filled with the soft creak of a bedroom door opening, footsteps across wood flooring, then her voice, clear, steady. "Just don't wake up, Megan, just don't wake up. Then everything will finally be mine." No one moved. The sound didn't echo. It didn't distort. It simply existed in the space between us. My uncle stumbled back into a chair. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." My mother's face drained of color entirely. "That's fake," Lindsay screamed. "She edited that. She's jealous of me." Marcus responded evenly. The audio timestamp matches the pacemaker logs and the smart home door sensor logs from this property. The synchronization confirms authenticity. The lawyer looked at Lindsay with an expression that had lost all neutrality. And then something unexpected happened. Aunt Patricia stood. Her voice trembled, but she did not sit back down. "There's something else," she said. All attention shifted again. 10 years ago, Megan's car brakes failed on the highway, she continued. The day before that accident, I saw Lindsay in the garage under Megan's car with a flashlight. Lindsay's breathing grew uneven. "I told myself it was nothing," Patricia said softly. "But now I can't ignore the pattern." She turned to face her directly. "Was this the first time you tried to hurt your sister? Or just the first time you got caught?" The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Lindsay opened her mouth. No words came out. She didn't deny it. She didn't explain. She simply stared at the floor. My mother made a sound I had never heard before, something between a sob and disbelief. The attorney resumed control of the room with professional firmness. He proceeded to read the will. "The majority of Grandpa's estate, approximately $400,000, was left to me. Lindsay's inheritance was the $50,000 she had already received. There was a clause. If she contested the will, evidence of financial misconduct could be forwarded to the appropriate authorities." For the first time in our lives, Lindsay stood alone. No one rushed to her side. No one comforted her. No one defended her. She stood abruptly as if to leave, but the attorney advised her to remain seated. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. For 38 years, I had been the invisible one, the strong one, the one who absorbed pain quietly, so the family dynamic wouldn't fracture. Now the fracture was visible, and it wasn't because I screamed. It was because I spoke. When the meeting ended, no one knew what to say to me. I didn't need them to, because the truth had already said enough. And this time, it stayed standing. When the will reading ended, no one rushed toward me. No one congratulated me. No one apologized. The room emptied slowly, like air leaking from something punctured. Conversations were hushed, avoidant. Eyes refused to settle anywhere for too long. Lindsay left first. She didn't look at anyone. Not at my parents. Not at Patricia. Not at me. The confident woman who had walked in that morning dressed for victory now moved like someone trying to escape a fire she started. I stayed seated for a moment after most of the room cleared. My laptop was still open in front of me. Marcus remained on the screen, quiet and professional, waiting for instruction. "Thank you," I told him softly. "You did the right thing," he replied. "Whatever happens next, make sure you protect yourself. Protect yourself." It was strange advice. I had spent my life protecting other people's comfort. Now the responsibility had shifted. In the days that followed, everything slowed down in a way that felt surreal. The district attorney's office reviewed the evidence carefully: pacemaker logs, the sleep app recording, the synchronized timestamps from the smart home sensors, witness statements. Nothing happened overnight. Legal processes rarely do. They require patience, documentation, structure. The prosecutor assigned to the case, Catherine Reynolds, was calm and precise. She explained the reality without drama. "Proving intent to kill beyond reasonable doubt is difficult," she told me. "But we do have strong evidence of deliberate interference and reckless endangerment." She didn't promise revenge. She didn't promise prison. She promised process. And for the first time, process felt steadier than emotion. Lindsay's defense initially attempted to frame everything as a misunderstanding, confusion with technology, panic, human error, but the 3 months of monitoring logs weakened that argument. So did the recording. Eventually, through legal negotiation, a plea agreement was reached. Lindsay accepted responsibility for reckless endangerment and unauthorized access to my medical device. She received probation, mandatory psychological evaluation, community service requirements, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting contact with me. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no shouting, no cinematic justice, just paperwork, signatures, and the quiet finality of consequences. The civil matter regarding Grandpa's missing funds proceeded separately. The estate moved forward to recover what it could. Kevin disappeared almost immediately. The man who once spoke confidently about future investments and shared dreams vanished within 48 hours of the will reading, his phone number disconnected, social media accounts deleted. Ambition evaporated when access to money disappeared. Lindsay's carefully curated life unraveled in slower, quieter ways. Her workplace placed her on leave during the investigation. Eventually, she resigned. Friends stopped responding to her messages. Invitations faded. The spotlight she had always commanded dimmed without anyone actively turning it off. No one destroyed her. Truth did. And yet, even with all of that unfolding, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation drained away. What remained was the ache of 38 years of imbalance finally settling into something real. 3 weeks after the will reading, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. I almost didn't open the door, but I did. She looked smaller somehow, older. The sharp certainty she used to wear like armor had softened into something fragile. "I don't know where to begin," she said quietly. We sat at my kitchen table facing each other. There was no script for this part, no lawyer, no evidence, just history. "I replay everything now," she continued. "Every time you tried to tell me something wasn't right, every time I told you to be the bigger person, every time I chose Lindsay." Her voice cracked, but she didn't collapse into theatrics. She just sat there, letting the weight of her words exist. "I failed you," she whispered. For a long time, I didn't respond, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I wanted to say it carefully. "I don't need you to fix it," I said finally. "I needed you to protect me. I needed you to believe me, and you didn't." She nodded, tears falling silently. "I thought she needed us more," she said weakly. "I know," I replied, "but you never stopped to ask if I needed you too." That was the truth that had shaped my entire life. Being labeled strong doesn't mean you don't need protection. It just means people assume you can survive without it. My mother didn't argue. She didn't defend Lindsay. That alone felt unfamiliar. "I can't undo it," she said, "but I want to try to do better." I leaned back in my chair and considered that carefully. Forgiveness is often portrayed as immediate and emotional. In reality, it's measured, conditional, slow. "If we're going to have any kind of relationship," I said, "it has to look different. You don't defend her. You don't minimize what happened. And you respect my boundaries." She nodded. "And if you ever suggest I should forgive her before I'm ready," I added, "we're done." "I understand," she whispered. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one adjusting myself to preserve family harmony. I was setting the terms. After she left, I sat alone in my living room and stared at the small scar beneath my collarbone. 6 months earlier, it had symbolized vulnerability. Now it symbolized something else. Survival. The estate eventually settled. I inherited the funds Grandpa left me. It felt heavy at first, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because it represented everything that had fractured to bring me there. The first thing I did was establish the Harold Davis Heart Fund, donating a portion to support patients who couldn't afford cardiac devices. It felt right. Grandpa believed in responsibility, in character. I bought a small house with a garden, something I had quietly wanted for years but never allowed myself to prioritize. I planted roses along the fence. Every morning, watering them felt grounding, tangible. Aunt Patricia became a regular presence in my life. Sunday dinners turned into honest conversations instead of carefully edited interactions. She apologized more than once for staying silent all those years. I told her something I genuinely believed. Silence protects systems, not people. About 6 months after everything happened, I received a message from an unknown number. I'm sorry, I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. I hope someday you understand. It didn't say my name. It didn't acknowledge what she actually did. It asked for understanding without offering accountability. I read it twice. Then I blocked the number. Not because I hate her. Because healing doesn't require reopening doors that lead back to harm. People sometimes ask me if I feel like I won. I don't see it that way. This wasn't about victory. It was about finally stepping out of a role I never chose, the quiet, strong one who absorbs everything. For the first time, I chose myself, and that choice didn't feel loud. It felt steady, like a heartbeat finding its rhythm again. 6 months after the will reading, life looked quiet from the outside. No headlines, no dramatic confrontations, no whispered arguments in hallways. Just ordinary mornings, grocery lists, meetings at work, and the soft rhythm of a heart that, thanks to the small device beneath my collarbone, kept time without asking permission from anyone else. But healing doesn't happen in silence. It happens in layers. In the beginning, I thought the hardest part would be the legal process, the evidence, the courtroom language, the plea agreement. I thought once those things were finalized, I would feel closure like a door clicking shut. Instead, what I felt was space. Space where anxiety used to live. Space where I had been bracing for impact for most of my life. The restraining order was formal and clear. Lindsay was not allowed to contact me directly or indirectly. The first few weeks after it was issued, I found myself checking my phone reflexively, half expecting some dramatic outburst. It never came. The silence stretched on, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. Kevin never resurfaced. Mutual acquaintances slowly stopped mentioning Lindsay's name around me, as if the absence itself was a kindness. My father kept his distance, speaking to me occasionally but carefully, like he wasn't sure which version of the family dynamic still existed. My mother called once a week, just as we agreed. Our conversations were tentative at first, weather, groceries, small updates. She never mentioned Lindsay unless I did. That restraint, more than any apology, felt like evidence of change. And then there was me. For years, I had defined myself by endurance, the strong one, the stable one, the one who could handle things. I wore that identity like armor, not realizing how heavy it had become. Without the constant pressure of defending myself or anticipating Lindsay's next move, I had to figure out who I was without the conflict. The small house I bought became part of that process. It wasn't extravagant, just enough space for sunlight to reach the kitchen in the morning and a patch of soil for a garden out back. I planted roses along the fence, the same variety my grandmother once kept. The first time one bloomed, I stood there longer than necessary, staring at it. It felt symbolic in a way I couldn't quite articulate, something delicate, surviving in open air. I established the Harold Davis Heart Fund with a portion of the inheritance. It wasn't a grand public gesture. I didn't issue press releases or post about it online. It was quiet, intentional. The first grant helped a woman in her late 50s who couldn't afford her pacemaker surgery. When I received the thank you letter from her daughter, I cried for the first time since the night everything unraveled. Not out of sadness, out of recognition. I had survived because technology and timing worked in my favor. Not everyone gets that chance. If something good could grow from what happened, I wanted it to. Therapy became another part of the rebuilding. I hadn't planned on it at first. I told myself I was fine, functional, productive, but trauma has a way of surfacing in quiet moments. The first time I tried to fall asleep in complete darkness, my chest tightened. Not because my pacemaker malfunctioned, but because my body remembered what it felt like to wake up unable to breathe. My therapist asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. When did you first learn that your needs were less important? I wanted to say, when my sister turned off my pacemaker. But that wasn't true. It started long before that. It started when I learned to minimize my achievements so Lindsay wouldn't feel threatened. When I apologized for things I didn't do to maintain peace. When I accepted being overlooked because being seen seemed to create friction. The pacemaker incident wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the climax of a pattern. Understanding that changed something fundamental. It shifted the narrative from "my sister betrayed me" to "I was conditioned to tolerate imbalance." And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. About 6 months after the legal proceedings concluded, I received a text from an unknown number. Just one message. "I'm sorry. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. I hope someday you can understand." It didn't say my name. It didn't say what she was sorry for. It didn't acknowledge the recording, the planning, the months of monitoring. It asked for understanding without offering responsibility. I stared at the screen for a long time. In the past, I would have responded. I would have tried to smooth things over, to offer comfort, to preserve some version of connection. Instead, I blocked the number. Not with anger, with clarity. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not the same as reconciliation. I can release the weight of resentment without reopening access to my life. Some doors stay closed, not as punishment, but as protection. People occasionally ask whether I hate Lindsay. The honest answer is no. Hatred requires energy, and I have spent enough of my life expending energy on dynamics I didn't choose. What I feel now is distance, and distance can be peaceful. My relationship with my mother continues cautiously. She has kept her word. She does not defend Lindsay. She does not minimize what happened. Sometimes I catch glimpses of regret in her eyes when she looks at me, like she's recalculating decades of choices. I don't punish her for that. Regret is its own consequence. Aunt Patricia remains the family I actively choose. Sunday dinners at her apartment are simple pasta, stories, honest laughter. She once told me, I should have spoken up sooner. I told her something I now believe deeply. Growth isn't about going back. It's about not repeating the silence. And through all of this, the most surprising change has been internal. I no longer wait to be chosen. That realization arrived quietly one morning while I was making coffee. I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The scar on my chest caught the light faintly through my shirt. For months, I saw it as evidence of betrayal. Now, I see it as evidence of resilience. I am still here. My heart still beats. Not because someone decided I deserve to live, but because I woke up. For years, I believed that if I was patient enough, kind enough, accommodating enough, my family would eventually recognize my worth, that they would choose me the way they chose Lindsay. I'm not waiting anymore. I matter because I exist, because I choose integrity, because I refuse to disappear to make someone else comfortable. That isn't revenge. It isn't bitterness. It's freedom. And freedom, I've discovered, is quieter than you expect. It doesn't announce itself. It settles into your bones slowly, like a steady rhythm returning after chaos. Every night now, when I lie down to sleep, I place my phone on the nightstand, out of habit. The sleep app still runs. The pacemaker still monitors. The house is silent. But the silence feels different. It feels safe. And for the first time in my life, that safety doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. It depends on the simple truth that I chose myself. And I will continue choosing myself again and again without apology. There's something people don't talk about when the crisis is over. After the evidence has been shown, after the legal papers are signed, after everyone has chosen their side and the noise dies down, you're left alone with the echo. For weeks after everything settled, I would wake up in the middle of the night, not because my heart was failing, but because my mind was replaying it. The sound of my bedroom door opening at 2:13 a.m. The softness of Lindsay's voice. The terrifying calm in it. Just don't wake up. The words didn't haunt me the way they used to. They didn't send me spiraling into panic anymore, but they lingered, like a scar you can't see but still feel when the weather changes. Healing isn't linear. Some mornings I felt strong, steady, untouchable. Other days, something small, a creaking floorboard, a sudden phone notification would tighten my chest before logic could intervene. But here's what changed. I didn't shame myself for that reaction. For years, I trained myself to suppress discomfort because it made other people uneasy. Now I allowed it space. I allowed myself to say, That scared me, even if nothing was actually happening. Therapy helped. Not because it erased what happened, but because it reframed it. My therapist once asked, "If someone else told you this story, would you blame them for what happened?" "Of course not," I answered immediately. "Then why do you blame yourself?" That question stayed with me. Because buried beneath everything, the betrayal, the confrontation, the legal process, was something quieter. Guilt. Not guilt for accusing Lindsay. Guilt for not seeing it sooner. Guilt for typing my password in front of her. Guilt for surviving. It took time to understand that responsibility belongs to the person who makes the harmful choice, not the person who trusts them. Lindsay made the choice. I didn't cause it by existing. As months passed, the family dynamic continued shifting in subtle ways. My father eventually called me one evening. His voice was restrained, almost formal. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. That was the first honest thing he'd offered me in years. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "Just don't pretend it didn't happen." He exhaled slowly. "I should have listened to you more." It wasn't a sweeping apology. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And sometimes real is enough. The holidays arrived quietly. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel obligated to attend every gathering. I hosted a small dinner at my house instead, just Aunt Patricia and a couple of close friends who had supported me through the worst of it. There was laughter in my kitchen that night. Uncomplicated laughter. No undercurrent of tension. No competition for attention. Just warmth. At one point, I stepped outside onto the porch to get some air. The winter sky was clear. I could hear soft conversation drifting from inside. For a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because I wasn't fighting to be seen. Around that time, I received an update from the foundation that administered the Harold Davis Heart Fund. The woman who received the first grant had completed her surgery successfully. Her daughter sent a handwritten letter describing how her mother had been afraid she wouldn't live to see her grandson graduate. "She's doing better every day," the letter read. "Thank you for giving us more time." I held that letter longer than I expected to. Lindsay had tried to take time from me, and somehow, from the wreckage of that attempt, time had been given back to someone else. That realization softened something inside me. It reminded me that the story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about transformation, about choosing what grows out of pain. I still occasionally hear about Lindsay indirectly. She moved to another state, took a retail job, lives quietly now, no dramatic comeback, no redemption arc, just a smaller life than the one she once imagined. Sometimes people ask if I feel sorry for her. The honest answer is complicated. I don't wish her harm. I don't wake up hoping she's miserable. But I also don't feel responsible for rebuilding what she dismantled herself. Empathy does not require access, and boundaries are not cruelty. One afternoon, almost a year after the will reading, I visited Grandpa's grave alone. I hadn't gone back since the funeral. I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets, unsure what to say. "You were right," I murmured finally. "Character matters." I realized then that Grandpa's test wasn't just about Lindsay. It was about me too. Would I continue shrinking to keep the peace? Or would I step forward when it mattered? For once, I chose the second option. Driving home, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror at a red light. There was something different in my expression. Not hardness, not bitterness, confidence. The quiet kind that doesn't need validation. There's a moment that stands out to me more than the confrontation, more than the courtroom paperwork. It happened one ordinary Tuesday morning. I was standing in my garden, trimming the rose bushes. The air smelled like fresh soil. The sun was warm against my shoulders. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a split second, my body tensed the way it used to. Then I pulled it out and saw it was just a work email. And I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I realized the fear response was fading. My body was learning safety again. That's what healing really is. Not forgetting, not pretending, but teaching your nervous system that the danger has passed. Sometimes I think about that night differently now, not as the moment my sister tried to end my life, but as the moment I finally stopped living on autopilot. The moment I saw the truth clearly. The moment I decided that being the strong one didn't mean staying silent. It meant speaking when it mattered and protecting myself when no one else would. If you're listening to this and you've ever been told you're too strong to need support, I hope you hear this clearly. Strength does not mean invisibility. You deserve to be protected too. You deserve to be believed. And if the people around you cannot offer that, you are allowed to build a life that does. I didn't lose everything when my sister's truth came out. I lost the illusion. And sometimes, losing the illusion is what finally sets you free. My heart beats steadily now. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but consistently. And every single beat feels like proof. Proof that I woke up, proof that I stayed, proof that I chose myself. And that choice, quiet, firm, unwavering, is the one thing no one can ever take from me again. A year ago, I thought survival meant making it through the night. Now I understand survival is what happens after the night is over. There's a quiet moment that still stays with me, not from the courtroom, not from the will reading, not even from the hospital. It's from an ordinary evening when I was sitting alone in my living room, the windows open, the air cool against my skin. My hand rested unconsciously over the small scar beneath my collarbone. I could feel the steady rhythm under my palm. For a long time, that scar felt like evidence of betrayal. Now it feels like a signature. Proof that I endured something that could have erased me, and didn't. People often expect stories like mine to end with revenge or complete reconciliation, a dramatic collapse, a public apology, a tearful reunion. Life isn't structured like that. There was no cinematic finale, no final confrontation months later, no confession speech delivered in perfect clarity. The real ending unfolded quietly, in smaller, more human ways. The legal consequences stood. The restraining order remained in place. Lindsay stayed out of my life. Occasionally, I hear through distant relatives that she lives in another state now, working a modest job, keeping to herself. No glamorous social media presence, no grand reinvention. And I don't chase those updates. I don't search her name online. I don't replay the recording anymore. That might be the biggest shift of all. The recording used to feel like armor. Proof I wasn't imagining things. Proof I wasn't exaggerating. I kept it saved carefully, almost as if deleting it would undo the validation it gave me. But one afternoon, nearly 11 months after everything happened, I opened the file and listened one last time. The door creaked. The footsteps approached. Her voice whispered. And instead of anger, instead of panic, I felt distance. The words no longer had power over me. I didn't delete the file. I archived it, moved it out of immediate reach. Not because I needed to forget, but because I no longer needed to relive it to believe myself. That night, I slept without checking my phone twice. Small victories matter. My relationship with my mother has settled into something honest, if imperfect. We meet once a month for lunch. We talk about ordinary things, recipes, books, the roses in my garden. She never brings up Lindsay unless I do. There is an unspoken understanding that certain lines will not be crossed again. One afternoon, she looked at me across the table and said, "I didn't see you clearly for so long. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't wrapped in tears. It was simple truth." And for once, I believed it. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a single decision. It's a practice. Not necessarily forgiveness of the person who hurt you, but forgiveness of yourself for tolerating what you shouldn't have, for doubting your instincts, for shrinking when you deserved space. For years, I thought waiting patiently would eventually earn me fairness. Now, I know that fairness doesn't arrive through endurance alone. It arrives when you decide that your well-being is not negotiable. The Harold Davis Heart Fund continues quietly. I receive occasional updates from the foundation. A man in his early 60s, a single mother of 2, a retired teacher. Each story reminds me that technology saved my life, but boundaries preserved it. If I had stayed silent, if I had accepted the accident explanation to keep peace, the outcome might have been different. Silence protects dysfunction. Truth disrupts it. The garden outside my house has grown fuller over the past year. The roses along the fence bloomed brighter this spring. Sometimes I kneel in the soil longer than necessary, letting my hands get dirty. There's something grounding about tending to something that requires care but doesn't compete with you. No one in my garden tries to outshine the other. They simply grow. There was a time when I would have described myself as unlucky, the overlooked daughter, the one who always had to prove herself. Now I see my story differently. I wasn't unlucky. I was conditioned. Conditioned to accept imbalance. Conditioned to equate love with sacrifice. Conditioned to believe strength meant silence. Unlearning that has been the hardest and most rewarding part of this journey. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I imagine what would have happened if I hadn't woken up at 2:47 a.m. If my heart had stayed in that chaotic rhythm a little longer. That thought doesn't paralyze me anymore. It motivates me. Every morning I wake up feels intentional now, not guaranteed. Intentional. A few weeks ago, I was invited to speak at a small local support group for people dealing with family estrangement and betrayal. I almost declined. I'm not someone who seeks the spotlight, but something inside me said yes. I told them the truth, not just about the pacemaker, not just about the recording, but about the years leading up to it, about favoritism, about minimizing myself, about how dangerous it can be to dismiss your own instincts because you don't want to disrupt the narrative. Afterward, a woman approached me quietly and said, "I thought I was overreacting for years. Hearing you speak, I don't think I am anymore." That moment meant more to me than the inheritance ever could, because it confirmed something important. My story didn't end with exposure. It evolved into purpose. I don't define myself as someone whose sister tried to harm her. I define myself as someone who refused to disappear. The scar beneath my collarbone is still there. It always will be. Some mornings I catch sight of it in the mirror and trace the faint line with my fingers. I used to see damage. Now I see survival. I see proof that even when someone stood over me in the dark and hoped I wouldn't wake up, I did. And waking up changed everything. Not because it destroyed someone else, but because it rebuilt me. If there's one thing I hope anyone listening takes from this, it's this. Your silence does not guarantee safety. Your compliance does not guarantee love. And your strength does not require you to endure harm quietly. You are allowed to question what feels wrong. You are allowed to gather evidence. You are allowed to set boundaries, even if those boundaries disrupt everything, especially if they disrupt everything. Because sometimes disruption is the only path to freedom. My heart beats steadily now. Not because someone gave me permission to survive, but because I chose to protect my life. And that choice, quiet, unwavering, deliberate, is the real ending of this story. Not revenge, not bitterness, just clarity. And the steady, undeniable rhythm of a life that continues. This story was never just about a pacemaker. It wasn't only about betrayal, inheritance, or the moment my sister stood over me in the dark and whispered something I will never forget. At its core, this story is about what happens when silence finally breaks. It's about what favoritism can grow into when it's never challenged. It's about how being labeled the strong one can slowly erase your voice until something forces you to use it. But more than anything, this is a story about waking up to the truth, waking up to your own worth, waking up and realizing that protecting yourself is not cruelty, it's courage. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt unseen in your own family or questioned your instincts just to keep the peace, I hope you remember this. You deserve to be believed. And if you want to hear more stories about truth, resilience, and choosing yourself even when it's hard, subscribe to Hanjiwe Yagi. This channel exists to remind you that your voice matters, your boundaries matter, and your survival matters. Stay with us. There are more stories waiting to be told.